Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Tooele Happy Hour podcast starring Jared Anderson and David Weiss, where if head trauma had a podcast, this is what it would sound like. Today's guest, Celeste Maloy. Maloy. Celeste Maloy. She is running for Congress in the special election, CD2. She even has Chris Stewart's approval, so that's a plus from my perspective. Celeste, will you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. I'm Celeste Maloy. I'm running for Congress. You already said that. I live in Cedar City. I'm really excited to be in this race, and I'm happy that we're going to be taking questions. I've been trying to get in front of as many people as I can and personally introduce myself, make sure people know who I am so they understand the choice they've got to make.
There's quite a few choices, too. In every party, I think they've got somebody running.
Yes.
So, Celeste, your history. Tell us about where you grew up.
Okay.
And what career paths you decided to take.
I like that you say career paths, multiple, because that is accurate. So I was born in Cedar City. My family lived in a little teeny tiny town in Nevada called Hico, about 150 miles west of Cedar. And I grew up in a single wide trailer with 5 siblings, and it seems like we always had somebody else extra living with us too. I won my scholarship that paid for college in a high school FFA soil judging contest, majored in agriculture at Southern Utah University, and by the time I graduated, I was working for the USDA, for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the old Soil Conservation Service. So I was working with farmers and ranchers, private landowners on a voluntary basis who wanted help with resource problems, and I was helping them solve mostly water problems, designing irrigation systems and writing conservation plans, and I loved it. I was in Beaver when I graduated. They offered me a full-time job there, and I spent almost a decade in Beaver. I was 21 when I moved there and 31 when I left. People ask me all the time if I grew up in Beaver, and I say I was technically an adult when I got there, but I grew up a lot in Beaver. And the longer I worked with farmers and ranchers, the more I realized that their lives are controlled by water and land policy that people don't always understand, and they definitely feel like they can't do anything about it. And it got to a point where I thought I had to either not care so much and just settle in and prepare for retirement, or I had to switch career paths and get in a position to do something about it. So I decided to go to law school. I was, almost a decade out of my undergrad. I hadn't been in an academic setting for a while. I didn't really know if I would be able to get in, but I did. And I went to BYU. The dean of the law school, when I was there, wrote the textbook on public lands and natural resources law, so that was a really cool thing. And when I graduated, I moved to St. George, went to work for the Washington County Attorney's Office doing public lands law. And I still wasn't quite sure how to change those policies that I had been frustrated with, but that's where I learned. That's where I got into policy work. I kind of did it almost on accident. I was there to write a county resource management plan for Washington County. But at the same time I got there, the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, in Washington County released their county resource management plan. And the county attorney's office asked me to review it and see if there was anything in there they should be concerned about. And I found a lot of things in there they should be concerned about. And when I was done reviewing the plan and put it back on my boss's desk with tabs sticking out of a lot of the pages saying, these are the things you should be concerned about, he asked me what we should do about it. And I keep telling people that's the day I really became a lawyer. That's when I realized that people were counting on me not just to identify the problem, but to fix it. Mm-hmm. And I had grown up, in this really rural area surrounded by public land, thinking that the government could just make rules and there was nothing you could do about it. And I think people in Tooele County probably understand this as well as anyone. Agencies make rules and regulations, and they have the force of law, but they haven't gone through Congress, and everybody has to abide by them. And I think that's where a lot of this helpless feeling comes from, where people feel like the government's just running over them, and you don't vote for the people in these agencies. They're not accountable to the public. And if they were laws that went through Congress, you could vote on your congressman. You have some control that way.
It does feel like I mean, when was the last time you talked to someone about, especially the national or federal government, and the impression you got from them wasn't that they pictured the government as an adversarial force?
Man, so you're saying when's the last time somebody talked to me and didn't see the government as an adversarial force?
That they saw the federal government as a partner or a teammate.
It's very rare that people feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, one of the big things that hit me is I'm a gun lover, a nut or whatever, and the antics of the ATF.
Yeah.
It's downright criminal for the ATF to say one thing, 10 years later, say another thing that makes felons.
And the ATF only has about 5,000 troops. Imagine if they had 87,000 of them.
Well, that's not really the point, because the ATF can rope, or the ATF in some circumstances can rope local law enforcement to pad their numbers. That's how it all works. But sure. Just that the ATF acted as a legislative body and tried to, this year, make hundreds of thousands of felons.
And you've never voted for anyone at the ATF?
No. Nobody
at the ATF has ever come to a town hall meeting in Tooele and asked for your support. And that's the problem. I remember in a law school class once, one of my professors was saying, like, when you think of the government, who do you think of? And somebody in the class said, you know, Congress and the president. And the professor knew a little bit about me and my background, and he pointed at me and said, when you think of the government, who do you think of? And I said, you know, people in white trucks with federal plates. And I think a lot of my classmates thought I was crazy because they didn't all grow up in a rural area, and I don't think they understood that when you live in most parts of this state, a lot of the 2nd District, your day-to-day life is very impacted by bureaucrats at federal agencies, and they have a lot of say over the decisions that our local governments make. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of happens behind the scenes for most people, and they don't recognize how much power these agencies have.
Yeah, and there are circumstances where, like, let's say the EPA, if they can catch and head off a disaster coming up.
Sure.
That's a positive thing. I still think it should be done with congressional support, because the EPA, lots of stories about how they've been abusing their authority lately.
Yeah, and even the Supreme Court has recognized that.
Yes.
But I'm glad
you 15 years.
Yeah, which is way too long.
That's insane. People bought a piece of land and sat in trial with the government for 15 years.
Yeah, and standing down the federal government is no small task. That's not the same thing as being in litigation with your neighbor for 15 years.
And there's no recompense they can get. They can't get that 15 years back.
No.
They couldn't sell the land because it was tied up with the EPA. No one would buy it.
But I am glad that you brought up, you know, that there are things the EPA is supposed to do, because I've had this conversation a lot in the last few weeks. If you live in rural Utah, you probably also know people who work for federal agencies, and they're good people, they're your neighbors, they work hard, and you like them. All of these agencies were created to do something. Congress delegated a certain amount of authority to these agencies. The problem doesn't come from them doing the job they were authorized to do by Congress. The problem comes when the agencies start reaching outside of that statutory authority and having mission creep and taking on new things. And it's Congress's job to use the power of the purse to hold those agencies to their statutory authority and only their statutory authority. For too long, Congress has let agencies run amok and then pointed at the agencies and blamed them because it's popular with the voters to say the EPA is out of control, or the ATF's out of control, or the Department of Education's out of control, when it's within Congress's purview to get them under control.
Why do you think they don't try so hard?
I don't know. I think part of the problem is that too often we go for the Hail Mary or swing for the fences. I'm going to mix up my sports ball metaphors here, but we want everything all at once. And, you know, in my adult life, I've listened to a lot of presidential candidates say, as soon as I get elected, I'm going to get rid of all of these departments. And I think when they go in and try to do it, then it turns out there is a legitimate purpose that those departments serve. And so they just end up not doing anything.
I think also there's a dilution that goes on when you got Congress, the Senate, and the presidency. They can all go in and, like, just say Congress right now is the big animal that's going after the ATF.
Right.
It's the Supreme Court that's going after the EPA.
Yeah.
But the EPA is probably being protected somewhere in Congress, which is shutting the Supreme Court down. Congress is going after the ATF, but the ATF is being protected in the executive branch right now, which shuts Congress down.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the power of the purse is exactly that, where I don't see why I don't like that our budget comes out in one big block.
Yeah.
I think each department, each branch, department, bureaucracy should have to put a budget forward before Congress every year.
So they actually do.
Separately.
This is something that I've spent some time working in. And I think most people misunderstand how the federal budget process works. So if you don't mind, I'll take a couple minutes and just talk about it.
Educate me.
Congressman Stewart's on the Appropriations Committee, and that's where the purse strings are controlled. Everything that the government does has to be authorized somewhere in a statute, but then the Appropriations Committee decides how to fund those authorizations. So there are things out there that are authorized that never get funded. They don't get done. And every agency does, well, the president's budget includes all of the agencies' budgets. And the agencies come before the Appropriations Committee and have hearings on their budgets. So we have their budget, we know what they're requesting, and Congress gets to ask questions about what's in that budget and why. And then those get put into 12 different appropriations bills. So it's not every agency individually in a bill, but it is split up into 12 bills by subject matter. And that's a lot easier way for Congress to review these and see what's in them. And nobody likes the omnibus spending bills. Everybody asks me about that when I'm out campaigning. But this Congress, the rules that the House adopted require that each of those appropriations bills be passed separately. And I think that does create the accountability that you're talking about. So the U.S. House of Representatives has to vote on each of those 12 appropriations bills separately. And the budgets in those appropriations bills are grouped by subject matter. And it does increase the transparency, and it increases the opportunity that members of Congress, even the ones who are not on the Appropriations Committee, have to offer amendments, to have things struck out, to try to defund things, and to have the conversation about why these budgets look the way they do. And I think that's a really good thing, because, back to our earlier conversation, your member of Congress does come to town halls in Tooele. Your member of Congress does respond to phone calls and emails from people who live here. And so it gives you a chance to weigh in, as opposed to...
There's a phone number to call your member of Congress.
Yes.
There's no phone number to call the head honcho at any of the bureaucracies.
No. And even if you did, they don't have any incentive to listen to you.
No.
True.
They respond from above them. They're part of the executive branch.
Yep.
Is there a way to break those 12 bills down even further? Say each 12 bills could be broken down into 5 more, maybe? I mean, would that even be feasible?
I mean, it's possible. I don't know that we would ever get anything done that way, but the agencies do come to the Appropriations Committee individually to talk about their budgets. And so they are looked at in more depth than you would probably think if you're just watching the omnibus bills be voted on at the end of the year, right before we run out of money when everybody's worried about a government shutdown. Hopefully this year we don't do it that way. But I do think it should give people a little bit of comfort that there is more of a check on that than you read about in the media usually.
Right.
It just doesn't feel like there is.
No,
I know.
it doesn't.
I mean, I'm a 10th Amendment guy. I think all these should be boiled down and managed by the states. I would like to see the EPA of Utah, the EPA of Nevada. There's an advisory board nationally, but I would like to see the EPA managed by the states.
So the states do have their own environmental agencies,
They do.
and they should be handling more. So the Waters of the U.S. rule, it's a really controversial one right now. I'll also tell you why it gives me a little hope that Congress is actually going to defend its own jurisdiction. But, you know, the Clean Water Act gives the federal government jurisdiction over waters of the U.S. And the Obama administration wrote a new rule that was more expansive. The Trump administration came in and wrote a new rule that was less expansive. And now the Biden administration has released a rule that's close to what the Obama rule was. But I listened to a hearing on it, and one of the people from the administration who was testifying about the harm caused by the Trump rule being less expansive said that there were like 87,000 dry streams that they didn't have jurisdiction over anymore. She didn't even try to say that anything bad had happened, just that the federal government didn't have jurisdiction over them.
I wasn't in charge of
like
this.
that was its own proof of harm, when if the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over them, guess who does?
The
The states.
The state. And it's not like the state has any incentive to have dirty water. I mean, there's just this assumption that the federal government is the only entity that can keep us all safe. And that is a scary and incorrect assumption.
Is it an assumption or is it propaganda to make people believe that?
Either way, I don't even care what the motivation is. It's a problem.
I think the states would have a better chance of it. And you could argue against me, because in Ohio, when they had Ohio River starting on fire, yes, but
that's why we passed the Clean Water Act.
Yeah,
that was before.
I think states managing stuff would be, one, more responsive, more direct. And also, I'm a petri dish guy. I like to see. I don't
know what that means. I'm scared to ask.
That means
50
states,
individual petri dishes.
they can try their own thing and fail or succeed, but other people can copy them. Where if you have one thing, if it fails, it all fails.
Right, and you can't tailor that rule to different situations.
That is true. And with the national EPA, I'm sure they suck all the oxygen out of the room when they show up. I'll bet the state EPAs, the state departments, just shut up and tuck into the corners of the room and raise their hand and answer a question when asked, but don't.
Not necessarily, but if the federal government has jurisdiction over it, then the federal government occupies the field, is how they say it in legal jargon, and then the states don't have a role to play, and that's not the way it was designed. But let me tell you, while we're on this subject, why the WOTUS rule gives me some hope. So the Biden administration released their WOTUS rule, and Congress passed a Congressional Review Act. And for people who are not Congress nerds, what that does is it makes it so the rule that they passed the act about is null and void, but it also makes it so the agency can't pass any substantially similar rule without congressional approval. So it's a really substantive tool that Congress uses to change rules. And usually it happens at the end of an administration and when Congress has flipped. So it's a way for a new Congress to reach back into the old Congress and try to undo things that they've done. But with this new WOTUS rule, the CRA passed the House and the Senate in the middle of an administration and with a Democrat Senate, which to me says Congress is ready. Like we've reached a point where Congress is sick and tired of agencies passing rules that exceed their statutory authority. And Congress is ready to start trimming that back. And I'm really excited to be running at a time when Congress is ready to start trimming that back.
Good. I'm honest opinion. I'll be transparent on this.
Yep.
I think if we don't start getting some kind of response from our national agency, I think this country's done.
We're definitely top heavy. Our permitting processes are ridiculous.
Our money's dying. We're done if we don't have people, or if we don't have representatives who are responsible to the people actually asserting control. They're just going to careen us off a cliff, and then everyone's going to wake up, including the people who think they're doing the right thing.
Yep.
I don't think they're doing it out of malicious intent. There might be one or two of them, but I think sometimes people are misguided.
Well, malicious intent can be identified from different angles. I mean, putting your feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk was considered malicious intent in this regard.
But I mean, I don't want to get drugged into that sidecar right yet. But no, I really want to see Congress assert its authority that it kind of gave up.
Not kind of. Congress gave it up.
And it's given it up bite by bite.
Yep.
You know, I mean, and it's not the first time we've been down this road of them giving it up. I mean, they started when Grant was president. It's notorious Congress gave up its authority. You know.
But I do feel optimistic. And if I didn't feel optimistic, I wouldn't be running. Running for Congress is a lot of work. I know that's not going to surprise anybody, but it's not the easiest thing I've ever done. It is fun, but I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think that we could get there. I think we're at a crossroads, and I want to be there when we decide which direction to go, because I know what direction we need to go. We need to go towards federalism. We need states to have more authority. We need the federal government to have less authority. We need Utahns to be empowered over people in Washington, D.C. And we need the separate branches of government to act as checks on each other. That's what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and just sight of taking a cane down to the Senate hall and arguing, I mean...
So I'm never going to be a cane swinger. I usually tell people I'm not going to be a name caller or a bomb thrower because I just don't find it that effective.
It's effective for re-elections.
Well,
that's it. That's all they use it for.
Well, as a lawyer, you have a different outlet than probably most other people because you can understand how to effectively attack law or at least challenge it. A lot of these people that probably don't have any of that kind of background, I mean, name throwing and bomb throwing is probably their only methodology.
If you're familiar with the story of the senator that caned the other senator. I mean,
that was back in the
direct lead up to the Civil War.
Yeah.
You know. But
well, hopefully we're not headed towards a civil war. Hopefully we're headed towards returning to some balance.
I think federalism. I think the 10th Amendment is the most important tool we have in our toolbox right now.
Yep.
It is. Well, the first is always the most important, but the 10th is the second. And then after that, we square the 9th away and all is right with the world. You can actually get rid of the third. We haven't had to deal with that. But then COVID came up and we kind of had to. I don't know.
I didn't come prepared to do a definitive ranking of the amendments in the Bill of Rights. This is exciting.
It's great. But
is it really?
Yeah.
But no, I enjoy that you say we need federalism because I think that honestly we need to wrestle that back.
That is what Jared wanted to hear. He's a big 10th Amendment guy. And you know what? I think he's right. I mean, I will even bring it one step further and say, let's give those rights to the counties after the states get them. But
well, you'll have to fight the state constitution on that one. States are sovereign. They came together to form the federal government, and they only gave the federal government certain authorities. That's the Constitution. But they also created the counties, so they've only given the counties certain authorities. So the states are kind of the keeper of all of the sovereignty, all of the jurisdiction.
Yeah, well, everyone can be a hypocrite once in a while, I suppose.
I think the thing I like about it, I like the idea of allowing some people to fail and allowing people to succeed and allowing others to watch them and judge them. I mean, it's the scientific process of government.
Well, and it just makes sense. This is a really large country, geographically and population-wise. It makes sense that what works in Utah might not be the same thing that works in Florida or New York or California
100%.
or Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And each of those states elects a governor and a state legislature. They have more than one legislator in every state, I think. But it makes sense for them to try different things and to learn from each other's experience. I mean, even if you're not cynical enough to say, let's let some of the states fail, let's let some of the states tailor rules that work for them. Instead of trying to put everybody into the same size box.
It's 100%. I do think that we could see like single payer health care if it's ran on state levels. Because it could be formed that way.
Right.
But right now you couldn't foot Utah with the bill of single payer health care in Florida with the high retirement population it has, or New York with its different stressors.
And if Florida wants to try single-payer health care and they find out it's not working, Florida can repeal it and try something else a lot easier than the United States government.
Yeah, Florida could copy Georgia. Maybe Georgia gets it right. And Georgia puts a period and a comma in different places, and that's the fix.
Yeah.
And that's the Petri dish idea. That's what I want to see.
This is great political theory. They should just let us solve all of the problems.
No, don't put me anywhere near politics. Nowhere near it. So, as you're running, you say it's fun, it's exciting. Let's play a game.
Okay.
You win.
Okay. So far, I like this game.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good game. Kind of what's your first steps? What's your expectations? Because you've worked for our congressman, so
I have.
You're familiar with the steps kind of inside the ring already.
Yeah.
What would your first steps be? You get back to Washington as a congresswoman. What would you expect of yourself?
That is a really good question. So let me set the stage for the answer a little bit. We are choosing someone right now to go back in the middle of a Congress, almost exactly halfway through a Congress. And one of the things I keep telling people is that I'm already partway up that learning curve, and it is a steep learning curve. And part of the reason I'm running is to continue a lot of the work that Congressman Stewart has been doing. I think he's been really good at responding to the constituents in the district and taking up things that people have brought to him that are important. So the first thing I do is gather all of those things back up and make sure they're still on track. One of the first things I do is meet with leadership about committee assignments. So Congressman Stewart's committees will get reassigned. They don't just put the new person into his committees. And he's on 3 really plum committees. I don't think anybody else in Congress is.
What committees are we saying?
So he's on appropriations.
So that's paying for everything government does.
Yep, that's the purse strings. He's on the Intelligence Committee.
That's
the top secret stuff.
That's future payments.
Yeah. And he's on the Select Committee to investigate the weaponization of the federal government. So the one that's looking into, the FBI and
that's
probably DOJ abuses.
The juicy one right now. Because when you turn on any social media, that's the ones you see Jim Jordan on.
Yep.
Matt
Jim Jordan
Gaetz.
chairs that. Matt Gaetz is on it. I've been staffing that. And it's a really important
been on
committee.
The inside of that.
I have.
I'll bet you can smell the blood and tears in that room.
So it has been a really interesting experience for me, reading through the materials and watching that committee decide what to hold hearings on and where to go next.
Would you be at liberty to say kind of your thoughts and feelings on that whole subject?
Sure. Nobody's told me I can't, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. I get asked a lot on the campaign trail, like, when is Congress going to do something? When's Congress going to do something about the FBI looking into parents who go to their school board meetings? When is Congress going to do something about the DOJ investigating people as a way of stifling their political views? And I keep telling them this committee is doing it. This is why I keep saying I think there's reason for optimism. I know a lot of things aren't great right now, and people are frustrated. And I get the frustration. I know people are fed up. I'm fed up too. But don't despair thinking that nobody's doing anything. Congress is slow, and Congress is slow by design. And I think that alone is a reason to be optimistic. Congress has to hold hearings and look through evidence and sort of plod through it, and that's a good thing because
and
it means
they've got to publicize it to get their people back home on board. Because if Congress doesn't have the ability to technically jail someone, do they?
No.
But they have the purse strings.
Yes.
So they've got to be able to get their people back home on board so that if enough Congress people decide to do that punishment, they've got the backing of the populace, right?
Yeah. And the trust of the populace. The people in this country need to know that Congress is responding to their concerns. People are clearly concerned about the Department of Justice right now. Congress is responding. They're holding hearings, they're looking at the evidence, and a select committee is required to produce legislation. So there will be legislation at some point to address this, but there's also the purse strings. So based on what Congress finds through this committee, they can defund things that the DOJ is doing or change the FBI's statutory mandate. They can address whatever it is that's causing this breakdown, and they're going to have to do it in a transparent way. The public gets to follow along and see them do the math before they get to the answer. And I think that's a really good thing. That's part of what makes our system work so well, is that the people get to be so involved.
It doesn't sound like they're able to really go in there and pluck one tactical purse string, though. They have They get 12 bills, and they have to go through that. And
they can pluck one tactical purse string.
Can they?
Yeah. I'll give you an example. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. So the reason the sage grouse is not listed as an endangered species is because there's been a rider in the Interior Appropriations Bill for years that says that the Secretary of Interior can't spend any money listing the sage grouse.
You mean the chucker?
Yes,
sage
I do.
Grouse?
Yeah.
And that's supposed to be on the endangered species?
Well, they've been looking at it for a long time, but they can't list it because they don't have any funding for it. And if an agency doesn't have funding for something, they cannot do it.
Have you ever hunted chucker?
I have not.
Okay. Have you ever hunted duck?
No.
Okay. Chucker hunting is much funner because you're not freezing.
I've shot a lot of jackrabbits. Does that count for anything?
Sure. I'm just saying, don't make that in. There's a lot of them out. I don't know. I mean, I can say there's a lot of them out there, but I don't know.
But the larger point is that Congress can get that specific. Congress can tell an agency, you don't have any funding to do this specific thing.
I like it.
And Congress should be able to get that specific. Rand Paul says that every dollar in the federal budget should be earmarked. And I know earmark is a dirty word right now because people conflate it with pork barrel spending. Mm-hmm. Pork barrel spending is a problem. But earmarking means Congress is saying where the dollars go.
You know where everyone is.
And Congress is accountable to the public. Mm-hmm. Your representatives have to come back and ask for your vote. The way it's been happening with no earmarks is that Congress just gives a big budget to an agency and says, we trust you to do the right thing with it. And we clearly can't trust them to do the right thing with it.
Right. So can we actually determine with that kind of a system where all the money in Ukraine is going if we wanted to? Or is that kind of just we do that on purpose?
We need to know where every dollar in Ukraine is going.
I think starting now we can. I think last year might be a little questionable to track that down, but...
Well, we need to be asking them for it.
We need to be. And it's sad that everything has become political. Every decision has become political, right or wrong. The COVID response, it was whiplash because it was political one way in the beginning, political another way in the middle, political another way at the end, and then the vaccines show up and it's political the opposite way in the beginning of that. And
we all lost sight of the goal. Remember in the really early days of COVID, we just didn't know what we were up against. Mm-hmm. There were bodies piling up in Europe, and everybody knew that something was happening, but we didn't know what it was yet. And right at the beginning, it was like, maybe we should all just stay home and not breathe on each other for a little bit while we figure out how this spreads and what it's going to do. And 2.5 years later, we were having completely different arguments that didn't really have anything to do anymore.
Became political.
Yeah, it as soon as it became political, it stopped being logical, mm-hmm. and it stopped being about trying to help people. It became about proving where you were on the political spectrum, and that shouldn't be the case with human life. Mm. It is, even in other cases, but we really lost track of a goal there.
Yeah, we did. I want to pose a thought to you. Maybe as a freshman congresswoman with experience, you can push this through. Now, our government is notoriously good with money and does not have a huge deficit. But maybe to make money, they can have like a drawing, a lottery for name that bill, right?
No, people on the Hill will never give up the right to name bills. And the reason is, think about the bills that you know the names of.
Patriot Act, evilest thing ever made.
But whoever came up with the name that will actually stick in people's heads. So in a Congress, the bills are numbered by when they're introduced.
But just think a bill that controls the judiciary being called the J. Edna Hoover was an evil bastard bill or something. Think about that.
How much do you think that would go for? How much?
I don't know. I mean, we could do just a bulk lottery. You pay $100, you get to put your, and there will be some ugly ones.
I like the innovative way you're thinking. I don't really like the idea of having a Bodie McBoatface bill, and that's what happens when you let the public name things.
Because right now, if this is my feeling. if the government names something one thing, it means it does the exact opposite.
No, there is some truth to that.
The Patriot Act is 100% right now weaponized against the population.
Yeah.
And you know what? That actually brings up a good topic. So me and Chris Stewart disagreed on this one particular topic of coming through about our national security, and that was Edward Snowden. Do you remember that guy?
I do.
So he did not think he was very patriotic in doing what he did. And I think I took the other side. Where did you stand on that issue back when that happened?
So I've debated this a lot with people that I know, and I am still a little undecided on that one. I don't like traitors, but I also respect people who are willing to take their own risks to bring information out into the sunlight. And I also am willing to acknowledge there's probably a lot I don't know about Snowden and what he knew and could have exposed. Does that, like, I don't know I guess the lawyer in me would like to know what the exposure for the U.S., the average citizen, you guys.
Yeah.
If he was exposing things that put you at risk, then that feels more like a traitor to me. If he's exposing things that just show us what our government is doing and puts people's careers at risk who should be at risk, then I feel like he's a patriot. And I don't know enough about what was in those documents to know where he falls.
I think it's deeper than that. He just had a talk, or an interview. It's quite old, but it was with John Stossel, and he explained that he was a contractor for the NSA. And the NSA has some limited whistleblower protections, but the contractors have none. And what he was noticing was that the NSA was doing a bulk capture of everyone's cellular communications. That was his big, I guess, horn toot. But he had no protections as he was a contractor. And maybe that's the idea, is just to strengthen. Well, the idea is to weaken the government to a point to where it serves that finely tuned purpose.
Yeah.
And then disperse that to the states, and the states take on a more dispersed, purpose.
So the purpose of government is to protect the freedom of the people. And I guess for me, the question with Snowden comes down to whether the things that he released help protect the freedoms of the people or put in jeopardy the freedoms of the people. And I don't know it in detail well enough to answer that question.
Here's a deep question for you then. This is a deep one, and I don't expect an answer.
I had no idea how wide-ranging this interview was going to be when I agreed to come on here. You guys we're covering a lot of ground.
If the government was doing a bulk data collection, would you consider that, even if they were doing it on the slight chance that they caught a terrorist or a mass shooter, but they were capturing everybody's stuff, and then it comes out that maybe on Friday nights they had a little game they played down at headquarters called "Look at These Pictures We Drew Off."
Nope, unacceptable. You have rights as a U.S. citizen, and if the government wants to get your information, they have a process they can use. It's called getting a warrant.
It's called the FISA court.
And they have to have probable cause to do that. So a dragnet, which is what you're describing, is unconstitutional, and I do have a problem with that.
And that according to Snowden, is what he exposed and why he did it. But
I just don't know whether he's being honest.
It would be nice.
I would need to know more.
It would be nice to look in deeper and see what all was released. But anyways, let's move away from that. We do have some questions rolling in that we'll answer for. But I want to get back to so the committees.
I never finished answering that question. We got sidetracked.
I do have I know, and we'll do that. We're squirrels. First of all, is Jim Jordan a nice person, or is he that bulldog we see on C-SPAN?
He is a nice person who is the bulldog you see on C-SPAN.
Well, he was like a wrestling champion in college, too. So.
Yeah, I think he was a wrestling coach, too.
Yeah.
But, I mean, personally, he seems very kind. But, I mean, he's a bulldog when he's trying to get answers.
I felt the same way about Trey Gowdy when he was in there.
Yeah.
And
I miss that guy.
Did he do his hair on purpose to look like his head was flat on one side?
I've never personally met Trey Gowdy.
Really? Because he had that, his hair, and I think it was a ploy. You know how lawyers sometimes will get a ploy? They'll wear a rumpled suit or, you
Sure.
know, the something. They get a ploy just so people look at them, and I wondered that about Trey Gowdy.
I don't know, but I have been a candidate long enough now to know no matter what you do, people are going to have questions about your appearance.
Well, you know what? Be goofy because they remember you.
Okay.
You know? I mean, don't be too goofy.
I'll find some way to be goofy.
You're just trying to make people more like you, Jared.
I know. But anyways, go on about.
Okay, committees. So one of the first things that I'm going to need to do is go talk to leadership about committees. Mm-hmm. I've been very consistent through this whole campaign. I want to be on House Natural Resources because it's what I'm already good at.
And
it's what I know.
The natural choice for that.
And it's so important in our district. We have water shortage issues. We have public land issues. It's just a really good fit for me and for the district. And I want to be on House Armed Services. Traditionally, Utah's always had somebody on that committee because we have important military installations in the state and in our district. And we also have industries that are dependent on those installations. And somebody's got to be looking out for them. Right now, we don't have anybody on armed services, but we do have Congressman Stewart on the defense subcommittee on appropriations. So he can cover that. But when he retires, then we're going to be vulnerable and we need somebody there keeping an eye on that. So those are the two committees that I'm going to go request.
I like that. On that, what's your thoughts on having the committee control being by the political party leadership? Do you think there could maybe be a better way to set up a committee basis?
Well, I'm never going to say there couldn't be a better way, but why don't you tell me what you're thinking and I'll tell you if I think that's a better way.
Okay, you said natural resources.
Yeah.
So you're a dirt scientist, for lack of a better word.
Soil. We prefer the term soil.
Okay, soil scientist.
Dirt is just soil when it gets somewhere it doesn't belong.
Yeah, so you're that. You would be a natural shoe-in for that,
Sure.
right?
I think so.
You and everyone else with kind of that scientific or biological area would be a natural shoe-in.
Well, the good news is the current chair of House Natural Resources is a forester.
Good. But
Bruce
what
Westerman.
What if like an opposing political party controlled the and just said, no, we're not putting you in there. We want to strengthen our party in there, which I think honestly we want the knowledge base. And I'd rather have a government that had some scientific knowledge of the subject they're dealing with than political strength in that subject.
So after an election cycle, when we know what the makeup of the House is going to be, then ratios on those committees are determined based on the ratios in the House. So if, when there's a big landslide for the Republicans, then you get more Republicans on a committee. But the majority party doesn't usually get to say who from the minority party is on a committee unless there's some sort of House disciplinary action like we've seen happen a few times lately.
Pelosi.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, yeah. I won't get into all of the House
We don't need
disciplinary
to,
actions.
and I'm not honestly saying I wouldn't want to do away with that because if someone is out of line, you do want to kind of have a means to censure them.
Sure.
And that's a means. But I just can't imagine where we would have a system that, I don't know, what's another off the wall committee that we could point to, but natural resources or taking care of animals or something committee that you wouldn't be a shoe-in on that because and the only way you wouldn't be a shoe-in is if we our Congress is overwhelmed with biologists and soil scientists.
But you don't always have to have a background in something to be good at the policy.
True.
I mean, I think I'm going to be one of the more wonky members of Congress because I've worked in policy before and I like policy. I like to understand how things work and we need people like that in Congress. But take Rob Bishop for an example. He was a high school history teacher. And in the state legislature, and he had a lot of good legislative background. He was chair of the House Natural Resources Committee. He's from Utah, and he understands Utah's needs, and he was a really good chairman, but he didn't have a forestry degree or an ag degree. He was somebody who cared and was motivated and listened and learned. And that works.
There's actually committees on Taiwan, and nobody's probably a Taiwan expert, but you got to have that committee.
I don't know. I just think it'd be a good idea, but I really want to call it a dirt degree. That just rolls off the tongue.
Well, when you go get one, you can call it whatever you want.
Two things I'm not doing is, one, I'm not smart enough for college, and two, I wouldn't put me anywhere near politics. So, but no. So the natural resources. Okay, I keep cutting you off. And
that's great.
What are some other committees you'd probably want to try to get on?
I mean, if I can't get either one of those, Utah could also really use someone on financial services. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of banking institutions here. I know they would love to see somebody on financial services. So
don't you have to kind of sell your soul to get on that? Something to do with our banking system in the United States?
Well, if that's the case, then I don't want the committee because I'm kind of attached to my soul.
Okay.
And I don't need this job badly enough to part with my soul for it.
Okay, I'm just saying from the last couple of years, I'm just wondering. I don't know. I don't have evidence, but I mean.
How about I come back in a year and report back?
Come back when you're done and report back.
Okay.
Because in a year.
You can look me in the eyes and see if you can still see a soul back there.
Yeah. You know. But no, that's...
Just put you in front of a mirror to see if there's a reflection, right?
Yeah. Hopefully I'm checking in every day to make sure my soul's in good shape, but I won't make you check in every day.
It would be good to have financial services committee.
It would.
Maybe figure out how to get control of what's been going on with our banking. Can they button down the Fed at all with the Fed's policies, which I'm not saying the Fed's policies are right or wrong. I'm just saying, can they have a say in the Fed's policies?
I believe they can.
Okay. All right.
I would also love to get on appropriations at some point. Having an appropriator in Utah has been so good for the state. It's a tough committee to get on. It's in high demand. But I do have some experience on the committee, and I don't know how leadership will weigh that, but I would be really excited to get on that one at some point.
Yeah. No, that'd be good. That'd be good. What are some other committees that might entertain you?
Wow, we're going deep into the list now.
What are that you might find interesting? Or
is there a Bitcoin committee?
I think there is a caucus. There's not a committee. I think the Energy and Commerce Committee probably handles that one. I'm not sure.
Makes sense.
And Energy and Commerce would be a really interesting committee because of the energy stuff. John Curtis is on it, so Utah's kind of covered that way.
Good.
And that's another thing that that I would consider as I'm talking to leadership about committees is what the other members of the Utah delegation are doing so that we're making sure we have as broad of coverage as we can without stepping on each other's toes. Because the Utah delegation is really good about making sure we look out for Utah, not just our own districts. So if one of us has something covered, then another one of us can cover something else, and it gives the state the best coverage possible.
Good.
John Curtis. See, that brings up a topic, an interesting one. So John Curtis is on a special list that I've seen going around the internet about
There's
people.
A special list on the internet?
Well, you're special if you're on this list, especially at the top of the list. He's actually one of the members of Congress that does extremely well with trading stocks. Now, do you ever notice anything about members of Congress maybe getting insider information on stocks or anything like that? And how do you feel about that particular
How do you feel about coming
stuff?
on this show to spill those beans right before you get in?
I have looked at a lot of the bills that are being proposed in Congress to limit the ability that members of Congress and their immediate family have to trade stocks. To me, it makes a lot of sense. Mutual funds, things like that are different. Somebody's trading it for you. But when you're trading individual stocks in an area where you, even if it looks like you have insider information, what it does is undermine the credibility of our members of Congress to the public. And if Congress has no credibility, then our system doesn't work very well. I have heard that there are polls out there that show that mice have a higher approval rating than Congress.
Like the Black Plague does better.
And I think mice probably don't have a lot of room to improve in the polling, but I think Congress might. And things like that would help. I'm not going to comment on John Curtis or his stock trading practices. I don't know enough about them. I do think he is an honest guy. But I think it makes sense for Congress to put some rules in place that make the public feel confident that members of Congress aren't using their positions to just try to get rich.
Well, it's not even that maybe he'd be using it to try to get rich. He would just have information before anyone else. And it would be natural reaction. I would honestly like to see simple program is that your retirement plan, your investments revert back to the state to be managed by whatever the state uses for its 401k and growth for that time you're in public office.
Well, that would be great because the state has much better benefits than the federal government does.
Yeah, benefits would be fine. But I think like the state, whatever Utah uses, I don't know, if it uses like Vanguard or whatever else, everyone has their own. But if it just said, okay, your investment plans, pull back and go here. The immediate family, that's where it get complicated because say you got a son that works at whatever company, would you have to suck his investments in this way? I don't know. How would you keep that honest?
I don't know. This is your idea, not mine.
I know. That's where it gets
Hunter
tough.
Biden. Maybe they'll finger paint.
That's probably not where we should be going for our federal policy.
Yeah.
So, what are our audience saying? Because
so
I'm sure we got some comments.
We'll go to
coming.
the audience. We won't keep you too long. It looks like one person is got a lot of questions. But, okay. Andrew says, what specific accomplishments can you point to over the last 4 years of rolling back the federal government?
It's a good question. I'll give you a couple of specific examples and also sort of an overall view. So some of the things that are the most important aren't the flashiest and don't get headlines, which is why it's good for me to come answer this question. But one of the things that I've been working on recently is stopping the new management plans on the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. So everybody knows that President Clinton, I forgot his name for a second there, it's been a while. President Clinton created that monument in Utah. President Trump came and shrunk the monument. And then President Biden went and changed the boundaries back. What that means is that the BLM had to write new management plans for the Trump monument boundaries. And the local governments liked those management plans a lot better. They liked that it gave more access and more flexibility to the locals. The new plans that aren't quite done yet are more restrictive and they don't like them. So using the power of the purse, I've been working with Congressman Stewart to try to defund those new plans to stop them. That is a very tangible, very local thing. It's never going to get big national headlines because it affects the people in our district. But it's something that the local governments asked for and need, and it's something that we responded to. Another really local example is the Northern Corridor in Washington County. It's a road that's been on their plans for decades, and when Washington County was participating in the legislative process to create the Washington County Lands Bill that got rolled into a big public lands bill in 2009, that was one of the things they talked about and bargained for and insisted that they needed. But once the bill was passed, then the agencies started creating rules that didn't allow for that road. So I've spent a lot of time working on making sure there's a route for that Northern Corridor because they need a way to move traffic from east to west. They've only got so many routes. And Washington County is beautiful, but the geography there makes it tough to site roads. And they can't just give up routes like that. So there are a lot of things like that that I've worked on that just aren't flashy. They're not going on someone's congressional scorecard, but they make a big difference in the lives of the people who live in this district. And that's why I keep saying I want to truly represent the people in this district. And those are examples of what I mean by that. You can game the scorecard system pretty easily. It's easy to know how people want you to vote in those scorecards. What's a lot harder But just as important is making sure that when someone from this district calls, when someone in Tooele County calls their congressman and says, we need help with our local water system, we're not sure we're going to be able to meet our obligation to provide clean, safe drinking water for our residents, that whoever's in that office responds and helps address that with whatever authority they have as part of the legislative branch.
And that is true. That's the little behind the scenes stuff that isn't a sexy vote on the floor.
Nope.
C-SPAN's not going to notice it. You're working behind the scenes to make that happen. Okay.
And that was your specialty when you were working for Chris Stewart, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, she's a dirt doctor.
So
I'm not a dirt doctor.
So if you're going to take the seat, who's going to specialize in that when you're up front having to speak on the floor?
That's a question I actually can't answer because it's not legal for me to have those conversations about staffing until after the general. I mean, you can imagine why. Nobody wants someone to offer jobs during a campaign to curry favor. So I don't know who's going to be my Celeste, but I do know that a member of Congress is only as good as their staff. And their staff is only as good as the information that they have. So I will definitely be making those decisions with an eye to those concepts. I've got to have staff who wants to work really hard and really cares about this district. And I've got to make sure that the locals, and especially local elected officials who do legally represent the people in their area, know my staff and know to call. If just because something is a really big deal in Tooele County doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in Washington, D.C. is hearing about it. And I think sometimes people assume that if everyone here's talking about it, then clearly your representative must know. But don't ever assume that. Just anyone who's listening, call your congressman's office and call often, because they don't always know what you're concerned about. But if you call, then they do know. And the staff needs to be really responsive to those calls.
I can never get Mitt Romney's office to take my phone call. It's always like an answering machine or something.
You're blacklisted there.
And that is why I'm not working for Mitt Romney's office.
All right. Chelsea says, what would you do to help get fresh water back to the people and fix our water rights rather than having it go to panacea like China and developers in government?
So that is a really good question. And it's a bit of a trick question. Water is in the state's purview. Water law is state law, and it should be. The federal government should be supporting the state when it comes to water. I agree with the substance of her question that Utahns should have their own water and not have it going to places like China. And that's something that I really hope the state's looking out for. One concrete thing I've done to back that up is I had a bill ready to introduce, actually, the week I found out that Chris Stewart was resigning, that would make it so that federal agencies can't require that they co-own water for someone to be able to have a permit on public land. So what that means is, if you're a grazer and you graze on the Forest Service, they can't require that in order for you to renew your grazing permit, they get to co-own your water.
Really? That been a
That has been a thing. And Utah has a law on the books right now that prevents it. But I was working with Senator Barrasso from Wyoming's office. He's the chair of Senate Energy and Natural Resources. That's what I'm trying to say.
So hold on. So out of Wyoming, all 5 people, they select one person to go represent them, and that person gets that sweet cake.
Wyoming has some awesome representatives.
I know. 2 of the 5 people in Wyoming are representing them.
They have 3. They have a House member and 2 senators.
So 2 people get to sit at home. I'll bet their phones ring off the hook.
All of my cousins in Wyoming, if you're listening to this, I apologize.
Hey, I do not. One, that's where I want to move. I love Wyoming. You know why?
No income tax?
What's the governor's name?
Oh, now I can't think of it because you just asked me on the spot.
Because he keeps his mouth shut. You don't see their governor on CNN or anywhere. He keeps his mouth shut.
No news is good news.
That's right. When D.C. wants to put the hammer down on the people and someone says, what about Wyoming? They go, that's a real place? I thought that was a fable.
I really thought it was going to be the income tax thing for you.
Oh, that too. I love that. But yeah, no, I love Wyoming. I do.
Now, this is a multiple part question here. Oh boy.
Okay.
All right. Andrew asks, who does she support for president? Who would she vote for House Speaker?
Wait, let's go one question at a time.
Yeah.
Or I'll
President.
lose track.
Let's do that.
I've answered this president question a lot of times, and I've been very consistent in my answer. I'm staying agnostic on that question because it's not my job to tell the voters who they should choose as their nominee.
And it's early.
We don't even know what the field looks like yet. But I have watched when people have gotten really, really dug in on a candidate, and then that person doesn't become the nominee. And then it becomes awkward to work with whoever the nominee is.
Sure
and
enough.
I don't think that serves my constituents well. So I'm going to wait and see who the nominee is, and then I will support the Republican nominee.
Well, what about the past? 2016, who did you vote for back then?
Which one would that have been?
Unless you don't feel comfortable asking.
No, I'm fine answering that. But everybody knows that I didn't vote in the last 2 federal elections. I was working as a staffer, and I didn't want anyone writing a story about my votes. But 2016 was before that. So I voted Republican.
Okay. Do you normally just vote Republican straight? Or do you actually deviate a little bit?
I actually go in and vote for everybody, but I've never voted for a Democrat. So I don't punch the straight ticket thing.
Right.
But no,
okay.
I've never voted for a Democrat.
And like me personally, I know like the last governor race, we had Dr. Cottom on the show. He was running as
Yeah, he was
Libertarian.
a cool guy.
I did not vote Republican that time, and I'll deviate back and forth. And I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of as a Republican to deviate when you see problems in the party. But that's my personal opinion. Some people want that straight ticket. Interesting that he's interested in that perspective, but okay, what's the next one here?
Who would you support for House Speaker? So this is, would McCarthy be up to not be House Speaker again? Is there an argument for that?
Well, in another year, when we have an election, then you have to vote again on House Speaker.
Okay.
Again, it's too early to answer that question. Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker right now. I will work with the Speaker. And I don't know what that looks like in the next Congress. So
I think McCarthy's been doing okay, right?
I do too. And, I had a friend call me during the, 15 vote process that we had at the beginning of this Congress and say, why isn't your boss voting for Jim Jordan for the Speaker? I said, Jim Jordan's not voting for Jim Jordan as the Speaker. There really never was any other option.
Yeah.
Despite all of the drama in the news, Speaker McCarthy was the only one running for that office.
I think even the Freedom Caucus knew that. Now, I appreciate the Freedom Caucus held out on that to get some concessions that I think were needed. What is
Sure.
it, the Holman Act, where they can actually take a bureaucrat and personally take their financial incentive away? Like if you, J. Edna Hoover, they could have honestly put that act through and stripped that person who was spying on everyone and stripped their funds. Like, keep doing what you're doing. We'll get to that later, but for right now, you're in the poorhouse.
Yeah.
Which I like that.
I do like accountability.
Yeah, I'm all about it.
Well, the next question is about the Freedom Caucus, and I think what they're trying to ask is, will you be joining if you can?
So this is another question I've answered. I've been talking to you guys so long, I'm forgetting how to talk. I've also answered this question a time or two, and I've been very consistent. I'm not planning on joining the Freedom Caucus. I do know some of them. I will vote with them when I think they're right, but I think joining the Freedom Caucus sends a message that you're not willing to work with leadership, or maybe you're not willing to work with moderates, and I don't want to send that message, especially as a super freshman in the middle of a Congress. But I don't have a problem voting with the Freedom Caucus when they're doing something that's good. Mm-hmm. I want to have that flexibility.
Okay. Would you vote to impeach the Biden administration? To impeach Biden? Essentially is all you can really do.
Okay, so the lawyer in me kind of hates this question. Would I vote to impeach somebody before they've had a trial and I've seen what the articles of impeachment are? I can't say yes or no to that.
Would you vote right now to have impeachment articles drawn up?
Yeah.
Knowing what you know.
If I saw impeachment articles that I felt like, someone deserved to be impeached, then yes, I'm going to vote for it.
But then we get Kamala. Jesus.
Well, and I do think that impeachment has become a cheapened tool.
It's become a tool to stop an administration from making any movement, which I love. I think the presidency shouldn't be making law, shouldn't be making as many adjustments as they make. The president should say, look, Congress, I know you guys told me that I need to put more pressure here, but 2 miles to the north, I need to add that in because it needs it there too. And that's it. But the presidency has become a pseudo king, at least in the minds of the populace, and that's destroying us.
Yeah, that is definitely something we need to address. But impeachment has also become sort of a tool, I think, in the mind of the populace that's exercised with impunity and too often.
And you look stupid at the end of it.
Yeah, and especially if we know for sure the Senate's not going to remove.
Just ask Kenneth Starr, where's he at today?
Then it's an exercise in political grandstanding instead of a tool that's used to protect the Republic.
Yep.
And protecting the Republic is more important than political grandstanding.
Yes. Okay, as it stands right now, with knowing what you know, would you be willing to defund the FBI?
In its entirety, probably not. But this is back to what I talk about every time I talk to people. I think the FBI needs to be defunded anywhere it's outside its statutory authority. So
constitutionally, it's outside its statutory authority.
Well, if
I don't know in the Constitution where it says the federal government has armed police officers.
Fair enough. But Congress has ceded some authority to the FBI to do law enforcement. And I think if they were held to that statutory authority, we wouldn't be having the problems we're having.
You're right.
The problems we're having are because they're reaching outside of what Congress has authorized them to do. And, they're doing things like investigating parents who go to school board meetings. Well, if a parent goes to a school board meeting, they're firmly within their rights. And if a parent goes to a school board meeting and gets violent or commits a crime, we have local sheriffs to deal with that. There is no reason the FBI needs to be involved in things parents say at a school board meeting.
Why did they do that?
I have no idea. I'm not going to speculate, but they're outside their authority. And so Congress should be prohibiting them from using any funding to do things like that. And then they can't do it.
That's right. That is right. Okay, big one. Will you stop the funding of the war in Ukraine?
Great question. Also one that I've answered a lot of times, and I'm going to give you the same answer I give every time. I think it was really important when Russia invaded its neighbor that the rest of the world stood up and stood with Ukraine and said this is unacceptable. But I hope that we have learned from history and we're not going to repeat a mistake we've made before. And we need to have a plan in Ukraine. We need to have an exit strategy in Ukraine. We need to know when we've accomplished our mission there. We haven't even defined our mission there. And we need an accounting for every dollar we've sent and every piece of equipment we've sent. While we don't have those things, we should not be offering them any more support.
I think Zelensky has used it in the latest picture I saw to buy Fidel Castro's 1972 suit he wore when he spoke.
That is a problem.
No, I don't know. I'm conflicted on the Ukraine thing. I think Russia overstepped its bounds, but this isn't about what I think. This is about you.
It's your show. I guess you can.
Convincing people we've argued it on here. People already know what we think. Okay.
And we change our minds too. I do anyway, sometimes back and forth.
Oh, here's a tougher one. Why do you think it's okay to live in D.C., pay taxes in Nevada, yet run in Utah? Why are you running here instead of Nevada? You used your sister's address to run because you didn't live where you filed.
Wow, that's a lot.
Just because the lieutenant governor said it was, this is a tough one. You don't have to answer anything.
I will answer it because I think it's important that people get this one right.
Okay.
So first of all, the last time I lived in Nevada was, around the time of my 18th birthday.
Okay.
So I grew up there.
So you weren't a soil scientist yet, or a dirt doctor yet?
No, I was a high school student.
You was a high school, you was a dirt intern.
Yeah, I was an aspiring dirt wannabe.
Okay.
I was a soil judger back then. But I moved to Utah to go to college right after I graduated from high school. I've stayed in Utah ever since. So some of this information is inaccurate.
Okay.
I do live with my sister, and I'm not going to apologize for that one. House prices in Utah are really high. And I've said a lot during this campaign that I think I'm a lot like the people in the 2nd District. And a lot of the voters here are renting and don't own homes because right now inflation's really high, house prices are really high, and it's hard to maintain a household. And I don't at the moment. I live with my sister. But the state legislature has looked into my eligibility to be on the ballot. The party has looked into it. The press has looked into it. And the elections office has looked into it. And they've all reached the same conclusion, which is I'm legal and I'm eligible and I'm on the ballot. So I'm ready to move on from those questions because they've been thoroughly answered.
Let me ask you this. You live with your sister.
Yeah.
Are you married? Do you have kids or any of that?
I'm not married. I don't have kids. I always assumed by this point in my life I would have, a minivan full of kids and be married to some farm boy somewhere in rural Utah.
Then you became a dirt doctor.
God has not seen fit to bless me with that yet, so I'm using my time and my energy to represent the people in this district.
Okay. Now, I've noticed a lot of the candidates were coming up saying, I've got this big family, and they're straight out of the chuck wagons from when they migrated from the East Coast to Utah. And
did they migrate in chuck wagons?
I don't know.
Is that how that happened?
The lucky ones might have. But do you think you have an advantage because it's you and you alone facing the floor of Congress versus having to worry about a family back in the homestead?
Wow, that is a loaded question. I do have good family support. I have parents and siblings who love me, but I do think that it makes it easier for me to travel around the district. If I had people who needed me to tuck them in at night, it'd be tougher for me to make it from, Wayne County to Tooele County on a weekend. So I think the fact that I can work hard and work a lot of hours and long days is an advantage to the constituents more even than it is to me. I know Congressman Stewart had a good reputation for covering the district. Almost everybody I talk to in Tooele County says, are you going to make it to Tooele County? Because Chris Stewart made it to Tooele County. That matters to people. And I think I can do at least that well, if not better.
Good. I wouldn't hold it against anyone for whether they have children or do not, or married or not. I don't think that establishes a bearing on your character or anything like that.
It sure seemed that way. As a delegate, a lot of people would always flaunt, hey, this is my family, look how big it is. And I'm wondering, as a delegate, in my age category, and knowing what I know when I was deployed in the military, a family can be very, very difficult to take care of when you're trying to provide services to the Republic. And I honestly always thought it was more of an advantage to not have the family, because
well that's
that
not
was
the
my
way
perspective.
not the way I planned my life, but I'm playing the hand that I've been dealt, and I'm playing it the best way I know how. So that means that I have more time and energy to devote to representing the people in this district than I would have if I had other responsibilities.
I just think that if you married a meteorologist, imagine that would be like the union. Or maybe a poo scientist. Both of those are important for soil.
Is there such thing as a poo scientist?
I'm not going to hire you to be my matchmaker.
No, do not. No, I'll be the first one to tell you not to do that.
I'll handle that one on my own, thanks. I'm not doing so well, but I think you might do worse than I have.
Oh, I would. I guarantee you that. Anyone who knows me says
it would be quite the Netflix series to see, though.
Okay, Chelsea says she'd like that answer. To be fair, I think that's for an answer that was up here. I don't know. It could have been an answer.
Have we really been talking for more than an hour?
Yes.
This has flown by. You guys have made this fun.
Oh, stop.
It's because we did the
Are we not trying hard enough?
J. Edna Hoover bill. Waters of the U.S. WOTUS rule. Okay, where everybody in water. Now they're making some comments. We'll see. Okay, WOTUS needs to go, not okay. I don't know much about WOTUS. And the P3s, she's told me 4 times what they are. They're like three P's. I can't remember what they are. But what are your thoughts on the WOTUS? Do you think that there is room for improvement? Do you think we have an issue with that?
Yeah, no. So that's what I was talking about earlier on in the podcast. See, I've been here so long now, you can't remember the stuff we already talked about. But that's the rule that Congress passed a Congressional Review Act on, even in a Democrat Senate. And so that's one of the examples that I give as why I'm optimistic that Congress is ready to protect its jurisdiction and get back to the separation of powers and checks on the executive branch the way it should be. Because I think that rule's gone too far. And even the Democrat Senate has recognized that it's gone too far. It
has. Why would you not be a Democratic congressperson and say, yes, I want to vote to be in control of this job you hired me for.
And that's why I think that trimming back agencies to their statutory authority is not a tough sell. Because even for people on the other side of the aisle who disagree with me about almost everything, they should agree with me that Congress needs to defend its own jurisdiction and its own ability to be a check on the agencies. Because it turns out when we have a Republican administration, Democrats don't want those agencies to be able to just do whatever the president wants. And to your point earlier, that people are starting to feel like being the president is such an important job because you have the powers of a king, and it's not supposed to be that way. Having Congress be a check on the executive branch helps combat that problem. Yeah. But now I think we've got to end this podcast because we've talked so long. Now I'm replowing the old ground that we covered in the first 20 minutes.
I just want to make a comment. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for being so open. I love the idea of Congress tearing back its power and giving it to the states because honestly, for you independents, much like myself, if you want to see the political parties not have as much power, diversify that power amongst states. Because you might see different states start being controlled by, you might see a Green Party in Vermont that has a voice, you know.
And if that's what the people of Vermont want,
perfect.
God bless them.
And California would go full on schizophrenic and they could do it.
Or they would look at the other states and see how well, say, Texas is doing, and they might start voting differently.
No, they would go schizophrenic for at least 5 years, and then they would crumble and collapse, and then they would look at Texas. And Texas is copying California of the 60s. Dang near 100%.
Really?
Someone made a comment once. You know who Carroll Shelby is?
No.
Anybody here know who Carroll Shelby is?
Never heard.
Carroll Shelby. He was a race car maker.
I was going to say, I did watch the Ford versus Ferrari movie, and I was wondering if it was the same Carroll Shelby. Okay.
Carroll Shelby's from Texas. And in the 60s, because Texas was restrictive on building stuff, he moved to California to build race cars.
Interesting.
That's a thought.
They left that out of the movie.
Yeah, I know. The cowboy hat said it all, I guess. But anyways, everyone, thanks for joining us.
It has been a happy hour indeed. Thank you.
It's been a happy
Not as bad
hour,
as you thought it was going to be,
minutes.
right?
We would love to have you back on anytime.
Okay.
Obviously, if you have a message to get out, we want to be open to everyone running.
Well, I think I did kind of already commit to coming back and doing a check on my soul.
Well, yeah, we're going to do a check on your soul.
Okay.
I don't know how you weigh that. Do you take like a beginning weight? Isn't it like when someone dies, they lose like 13 ounces or something? I read that in some scary
I'd rather
book.
not die to figure it out. Let me do some research and see if there's a way we can check without me having to be dead.
Yeah, maybe my dog can sniff it out. But anyways, thanks for joining us. If we didn't get to, public-private partnerships, that's the P3s. If we didn't get to any of your questions or comments, where can people go to get a hold of you if they want to shoot you a question, shoot you a message?
So you can go to my website. It's celesteforutah.com, and there's a box in there where you can send me messages, you can send me emails, you can text me. People have been, and I love hearing from people. Yep,
and we've got the website pulled up here. It's not in. It will be in the show notes. We don't need to flash it on screen. Our team donate, and they can just reach out and pop questions, or even if they maybe have a concern that they want you to look into.
Sure. Okay. I'm trying to talk to as many people as I can right now. It helps if I know where they are and what they want to know.
Good. Good. Thanks for coming on, everyone. This has been the Republican nominee to be thrown into the volcano of government. Thank you for coming on, Celeste. It's been an entertaining conversation.
It
A lot
has.
of knowledge falls out of your head when we're chatting. I like that. Everyone, sorry
Have a
if we
good
didn't
night.
get to your question, but we'll be back later.
Thanks.